Most people, when they talk about criminal behaviour, have a psychological perspective. Criminals made the choice to commit a crime and should serve the time. Offenders just didn't learn the difference between right and wrong when they're growing up, and harsh sentences will act as a deterrent for the worst crimes. But there is a very different explanation for criminal behaviour that these arguments just don't match. What if people are born criminals? Psychboost.com, over 170 videos to help you with your qualification, and Patreon supporters can access bonus resources, tutorial videos, and the Discord channel. We're going to start this discussion of biological explanations with Lombroso's idea of the atavistic form. He published his ideas in The Criminal Man in 1876. Now, before I start, this theory is going to sound really problematic, and it is. But take a moment to consider that before a scientific approach to explain criminal behaviour, historically people would use a religious explanation, suggesting that people who committed crimes were possessed by demons or corrupted by the devil. So while you are going to disagree with Lombroso's theory, you'll probably agree it's at least a step towards a more scientific understanding of criminality. So what is the atavistic form? Well, atavus is a Latin word for ancestor, and taking an evolutionary perspective, Lombroso suggests that criminals are people from an earlier stage of development, so are genetic throwbacks to an earlier, more primitive stage of human evolution. This is compared to modern humans who, according to Lombroso, are the non-criminals. This means that criminals are born criminal. Criminality is innate. And importantly, Lombroso argued that we can identify these criminals. They're less evolved, so physically and mentally different than non-criminals. They should look and behave similar to our genetic ancestors, and this is called degeneration. Some of the physical differences are asymmetrical face, a heavy brow, either very small or big ears that stick out from the head, large jaws, and excessively long arms. Lombroso even suggested different types of criminals had different physical features. For example, an upturned nose in thieves and a beak-like nose in murderers. Lombroso's work founded what is known as the positivist school of criminology. This suggests that criminal behaviour has a set of distinct characteristics, and using careful measurement of criminals and non-criminals, positivist criminologists can find evidence for the causes of criminal behaviour. So as Lombroso argued for biological differences, he backed up his ideas with biological measurements. Over the years, Lombroso and his students measured the bodies of over 4,000 living and dead criminals, mainly focusing on the skull. Evaluations of atavistic form. Now, when evaluating Lombroso's theory of the atavistic form, we can start with the research he conducted. While he studied the bodies of thousands of criminals, he didn't really compare these results to a control group of non-criminals. This suggests that the features observed by Lombroso could have been common in non-criminals at the time, and might have been linked to nutrition in the poor or linked to the presence of physical and mental illnesses. Later research by Goring did use a control group, comparing a wide range of biological measurements of over 3,000 English non-criminals with 3,000 English criminals. And the results of the study? The physical and mental constitution of both criminal and law-abiding persons of the same age, stature, class and intelligence are identical. There is no such thing as an anthropological criminal type. Well, after that study, Lombroso's atavistic theory lost popularity among scientists. I do have some positive evaluations, but before talking about any positive legacy of Lombroso's work, I think we need to talk about the scientific racism of his ideas. Lombroso explicitly selected features of human anatomy that are common among black people. His theory then suggests that black people are biologically less evolved and therefore criminal. Now, these ideas have been used to justify policies that have harmed black communities. For example, the eugenics movement that attempted to stop groups having children if they were thought to be genetically unfit, to racist IQ testing in America which was biased against black people. So while these ideas have been rejected by modern psychology and biology, it's still a part of the subject's legacy, and highlights the importance of carefully considering the social sensitivity of the research that we conduct. Another similar point, Lombroso's theory has a problem with cause and effect. It could be that many of the criminal physical characteristics he identified actually led to stigma. These people, because they were rejected by society, turned to crime, ultimately creating a criminal stereotype that ends up working as a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you look a certain way, you're told you look like a criminal, so you act like one. Okay, so what can we say that is a positive of Lombroso's ideas? Well, his positivist criminology was the first scientific attempt to define the causes of criminal behaviour, attempting to confirm theories using empirical methods, taking careful measurements, and this was an improvement on theories that suggested criminality was due to sin, demonic possession, or that criminals were just feeble-minded. One point that could be seen as positive or negative in evaluating Lombroso is he rejected free will, and suggested criminal behaviour was due to biological determinism. Because that means that factors outside of the criminal's control, this supports an argument for less severe punishments and a focus on treatment. Before I go on, a final fact about Lombroso. He requested that after he died, his colleagues add his body to his research. They examined his skull and took measurements, and now in his own museum in Turin, Italy, his perfectly preserved head floats in a glass jar, alongside hundreds of the skulls he used as evidence for his theory. Now, I'm not going to show you a picture of that, but if you're interested, you can Google it. Genetic and neural explanations. Atavistic theories have been completely rejected, and many of the theories after focused on social explanations for crime. But the idea that criminals are born, so criminal behaviour is innate, never really went away, and now it's an active area of research. While genetic and neural explanations are linked, and I'm going to talk about the connections between them, keep in mind you can be asked about them individually, and that should shape your response to the question that you're asked. So what are the arguments that criminality is genetic? Well, in any discussion of genes and behaviour, we should make the distinction between the presence of the gene in the genetic code, or the genotype, and the expression of that gene. So the actual behaviour that the genotype codes for, the phenotype. So this explanation suggests that violent criminals inherit a gene or set of genes that lead to violent crime. One indication is to look at family studies, twin studies and adoption studies to see if criminal violence is more common between genetically close family members, especially if shared environment is controlled for, and that is what we actually see. However, while that indicates a genetic origin, it can't tell us which genes are responsible. Candidate genes have been suggested, and one example is the short variant MAOA gene. This gene regulates the production of MAOA enzyme and works by breaking down neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. This short version produces fewer enzymes, disrupting the brain's ability to regulate those neurotransmitters. I'll tell you in a few minutes what those neurotransmitters do in more detail, but this genetic variant is linked to poorer impulse control. Now, about 1 in 3 males worldwide have the short variant MOA gene, and they're not all violent criminals. So the argument is genetic factors only produce aggressive behaviour in combination with environmental factors. One argument is diathesis stress. The presence of a gene is a vulnerability, the diathesis. But later negative life events called stressors are needed to trigger the violent behaviour. Before I talk about neurological factors, I want to tell you about an evaluation. This is a meta-analysis. Recombined the participants of 51 adoption and twin studies, including over 110,000 participants. All of these studies looked at antisocial behaviour, and from this data, Ree was able to calculate the relative contribution of genetic and environmental factors on antisocial behaviour. Genetics accounted for 41% of the variance, and environmental factors 59%. Now you might look at this and say, well, it looks like the environment is more important than genetics. And that might be true. But genetic theories of violent crime have not been accepted at all by many theorists. So this is strong evidence that genetic factors really do play a large determining role in if someone is going to display antisocial behaviour, with huge implications that I'll cover in the evaluations. The neural explanation suggests there are a range of biological processes in the brain that lead to criminal behaviour. Now, of course these processes are likely due to the genetic factors. But if we consider neurotransmitters first, so the biological molecules that regulate brain activity at the synapse, there are a few that are linked to offending. Noradrenaline, it's part of the fight or flight response, and higher levels are linked to violence. Levels of serotonin are linked to impulsive behaviour, and a craving for dopamine, as seen in drug addicts, can lead to criminal behaviour that satisfies that craving. If we look at large neural structures in the brain, there are two locations that seem to be linked to violence: the limbic system and the frontal cortex. Emotions like guilt, empathy, and compassion are processed in the limbic system. Low activity here is associated with psychopathic behaviour. People able to commit violence without feeling any of the emotions that would usually stop that behaviour. The frontal cortex is a place where your decision making happens, also known as executive function. If this area is smaller and less active, then it's less able to override and stop strong negative emotions and impulses, resulting in violent behaviour. Research evaluations. So what evidence is there for genes and neurological factors? Well, our understanding of the MOAO gene started with a researcher called Brunner. He investigated the case of a family from the Netherlands. The men of this family were exceptionally violent. Brunner discovered that the males in this family had a faulty version of the gene. It produced virtually no enzyme. This suggests that criminal aggression could have a genetic origin that results in a neurological change, ultimately resulting in violent criminality. The next two studies just consider neural structures. Firstly, Rain found that the prefrontal grey matter volume in people with antisocial personality disorder was 11% less than a control group. This data suggests that there is a link between a neurological difference and the reduction in conscience in people with APD. And a final study by Keel is an fMRI study of criminal psychopaths, non-psychopaths, and a control group of non-criminals. Only the criminal psychopaths showed a reduction in activity in the limbic system, suggesting they don't experience the strong emotions that most people feel that inhibit violence. General evaluations. If we do take a biological approach to criminal behaviour, this has important implications. Genetic and neural factors are completely out of the control of the individual. Criminal justice could view people who are biologically predisposed to violence as needing treatment rather than punishment. And there are strong views on both sides of this debate. But it is possible treatment could lead to a safer society, as punishment is unlikely to be effective against people with a biological vulnerability. However, researchers in this area do need to be careful about the socially sensitive nature of their research. Genetic theories around violence could lead to policies that are discriminatory of groups of people with certain genotypes, and then go on to justify that discrimination on the basis of reducing violent crime. Any attempt at explaining violent crime as purely biological would of course be biologically reductionist. A more holistic approach would include factors like drug use, mental illness, and childhood development. Also, a consideration of how these factors interact would be closer to a valid understanding of criminal violence. Also, much of the research linking genes to crime has focused on violent crime, and many criminals are not violent. One final point is about the validity of many of these studies. It can be difficult to obtain large samples of violent criminals for studies, especially those that happen to be twins or adopted. So many of those studies measure antisocial behaviour at a non-criminal level. It could be argued this is very different to violent offending. Here are some real exam questions that you can try out. Patrons can see a walkthrough video of these over on my website. For everybody else, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you in the next video, Eisenach's theory of the criminal personality.